the internet is at an inflection point. The amount of data we are consuming is growing, and yet we continue to pay a fixed price per month for our internet connection, regardless of how much data we consume. Our collective data consumption is outpacing the revenue we pay to the companies that connect us to the internet. This has happened as we've gone from using the internet for email, to streaming music, to video chat, to streaming HD movies. Our demand for data appears to exceed the bandwidth available to bring it to us. So how did we get here? First, let's make sure we're all on the same page about how the internet works. Let's define the word internet. Breaking the word into its component parts: inter, meaning between, and net, an abbreviation for network. Internet means network of networks. The first building block of the internet is a single personal computer. We'll call that a client computer. A client could also be a smartphone, a tablet, or any other internet-connected device. When two or more clients connect to one another, they comprise a network. This connection can be physical, via telephone, TV, or fibre optic cables, or it can be wireless, such as via a mobile connection. When two networks connect, they constitute a network of networks. Extrapolating this further, we begin to get a picture of the millions of clients connecting to each other via the internet in the United States. However, clients don't actually connect directly to the internet, but rather via an internet service provider, an ISP. Well-known ISPs in the US include Comcast, Time Warner, and AT&T. When an internet user, we'll call ours Peter, wants to send an email to his friend Corey, Peter's computer connects through his ISP, say Comcast, to Gmail. For Corey to receive the email, he connects through his ISP, let's say AT&T, to reach Gmail servers and retrieve the message. For the first few years, data-like services, like email, were pretty much all we did on the internet. Little bits of data travelled back and forth through ample-sized pipes. However, over time, the services available for use online became much more data-intensive. We went from only sending emails, which represented kilobytes of data, to streaming movies, which require gigabytes, more than a 1,000-fold increase in data intensity. Now imagine the impact of this consumption multiplied across millions of Peters. ISPs claim that once ample pipes are now overwhelmed and they need to charge us for the amount of data we use to lessen the pressure on the system. Opponents claim the ISPs are trying to discourage internet use to avoid making necessary investments in their networks. Unlike the utilities we consume in our homes, like electricity or water, for which we're charged by the amount we consume, in the US we pay a fixed price regardless of how much internet we use. ISPs have tried usage-based pricing in the past, but were met with resistance. In 2008, Time Warner tried to charge subscribers in Beaumont, Texas by the amount of data they used, similar to how our cellular data plans are structured, but consumers revolted. Some felt Time Warner was trying to discourage users from using Netflix, which competed with Time Warner's own television service. So if ISPs face challenges charging subscribers for the increased data flowing through their pipes, who else can they charge? Before we can answer that question, let's quickly take a step back and outline who else occupies the internet ecosystem. The internet ecosystem can be broken down into three main player categories: content providers, connectivity providers, and subscribers. Content providers create and enable entertainment, communication, transactions, and general content through the internet. This content is transmitted to subscribers, which could be households or other businesses, through a network of internet connectors, including ISPs, core networks, and interchange operators. Amongst these groups, ISPs have been going after content providers, such as Netflix, YouTube, and Hulu. Much like subscribers, ISPs charge content providers a fixed price, rather than by how much data they're pushing out. ISPs would like to create a fast lane charging content providers to move data to subscribers more quickly, or perhaps to move data from those who don't pay more slowly. Netflix has recently made a splash by signing 2 such fast lane arrangements with Verizon and Comcast. This brings us to an examination of net neutrality. Net neutrality is the principle that ISPs should transmit all content equally without charging for preferential treatment. Proponents fear ISPs' market power since in many places in the US, subscribers have limited choice amongst ISPs. They fear ISPs will abuse their market power and price discriminate amongst content providers, targeting in particular companies that compete with their own services. They believe ISPs should be regulated like utilities. They believe a fast lane will increase the cost of providing content online and hurt smaller startups who are unable to pay for such premium services. They say this could limit both innovation and free speech, inhibit competition, and diminish users' experience of the internet. Net neutrality opponents, by contrast, defend the private property rights of ISPs, who they believe have a right to profit from the risky investments they made in internet infrastructure. Charging differently for content providers who put more data through their pipes, they argue, is price dispersion, pricing to cover their costs, rather than price discrimination. They believe that media attention and new technologies will regulate ISP behaviour more effectively than government can. Some even argue the true problem is actually a lack of consumer choice. The government should instead focus on reducing concentration within the ISP industry. Into the 1990s, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, enjoyed strong regulatory control over communications. The Communications Act of 1934 created the FCC and gave it control of radio and phone, labelling them both common carriers. The goal was to make available, so far as possible, to all the people of the United States, a rapid, efficient, nationwide and worldwide wire and radio communication service with adequate facilities at reasonable charges. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 shook things up a bit. It left phone services under FCC control and required that phone operators sell competitors access to their network. But it deemed cable companies not to be common carriers, to be outside FCC control, and not to be required to sell competitors access to their network. As subscribers jumped from phone to faster cable internet service, independent ISPs lost access to customers. In National Cable and Telecommunications Association versus Brand X Internet Services, the Supreme Court upheld the FCC's determination, ruling that the cable companies were indeed not required to sell independent ISPs access to their network. On the heels of that decision, the FCC then deregulated DSL, Internet over Phone Lines, as well. It moved to a series of voluntary principles. First, the Network Freedom Principles in 2005, followed by the Open Internet Order in 2010. Both stated that ISPs should not block subscriber access to unlawful content, and that ISPs should disclose network management principles. However, the FCC has had problems enforcing these voluntary principles. In 2008, it ordered Comcast to cease and desist its practice of throttling subscribers' access to BitTorrent. A US Court of Appeals later ruled that because the FCC had not named cable companies as common carriers in 1996, they could not nevertheless regulate them. The FCC lost a similar case in 2014 against Verizon, in which a DC Circuit Court ruled the FCC could not enforce equal treatment of traffic as part of its open internet rules. In justifying its ruling that ISPs can discriminate between content travelling over the networks, the court drew parallel to trains, stating that if the seats are full, they do not have to carry passengers in the aisles. But are the seats full? Leading up to the Verizon court decision, data throughput on some of the largest broadband providers in the US declined precipitously, only to dramatically increase again immediately after the decision came down. The decrease in throughput could have been due to increased subscribers, increased data consumption per subscriber, or perhaps because ISPs were deliberately throttling speeds in order to build a case for metered pricing. Taking Time Warner as an example, we would expect to see an increase in subscribers during the same window when the throughput speeds tanked. However, subscribers are fairly flat. Additionally, we could expect to see an increased capex preceding the dramatic improvement in throughput, but again, capex looks flat. In the wake of these court decisions, the FCC is considering whether to permit a fast lane. FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler is currently circulating a draft proposal for rulemaking within the FCC that will update the open internet rules in light of the Verizon ruling. Wheeler wrote in an April 2014 blog post that the FCC will not permit ISP behaviour harmful to consumers or competition, including favouring traffic from an affiliated entity. The new standard for ISP behaviour will be that which is commercially reasonable. Net neutrality proponents fear this marks the death knell for the ideal and that Wheeler's language is in fact a capitulation, allowing for the creation of a fast lane online. If the FCC does permit a fast lane, ISPs could charge a gate fee or in economic terms, a tax on services using the internet. Based on current primetime usage, this invariably targets content providers like Netflix and YouTube, and minor players with pockets deep enough to pay, like Hulu and Amazon. Much like cigarette and hotel taxes, content providers would likely pass these fast lane taxes onto subscribers. And since in the US, subscribers are usually limited to only one or two ISPs, their inability to switch ISPs would mean they might lose access to services that choose not to pay for their ISP's fast lane. Worse yet, ISPs also have proprietary streaming offerings, such as AT&T's Uverse or Comcast's Xfinity, incentivizing them to actively throttle competitors. Even if ISPs did not throttle competitors, a fast lane would still limit the ability of new content providers to enter the market, raising the industry's minimum efficient scale. And assuming ISPs don't invest fast lane revenues in greater bandwidth, content providers unable or unwilling to pay for the fast lane would likely suffer compressed speeds on the bandwidth that remains. Such investments are unlikely because ISPs have reached the frontier of profitable infrastructure investments. Verizon, the ISP with the most opportunity for both investment and ability to capture share, has ceased investment in its fibre optic offering, Fios, as of 2012. According to the General Counsel for Verizon, Wall Street punished us for investing in Fios, and that Fios was only designed to reach a relatively small portion of the country. Why would Verizon invest in such an experiment only to reach a certain proportion of the country? The challenge lies in the last mile. The last mile refers to the distance between the local exchange and the subscriber's home. The constraints of the last mile explain why the creation of fast lanes will compress speeds on the remaining bandwidth. For example, in New York City, a local exchange has a speed of 10,000 megabits per second, which is more than sufficient for subscribers' needs. However, the line connecting the exchange to the household, either ASDL, a copper phone line, or coaxial cable, which is used to connect TVs, creates a bottleneck. These speeds are true if directly plugged into Ethernet cords. However, the situation is exacerbated by the use of Wi-Fi, which can lose up to 50% of bandwidth speed. The result? Your cat video has to buffer. The hook to the last mile is that it is wholly owned by a single ISP, reducing the incentive for investment for fibre beyond the exchange. While each is in theory capable of the 5 megabits per second required to stream HD on Netflix, actual speed enjoyed by subscribers are typically lower, owing to the negative effects of distance from the exchange and sharing the line's capacity with other users. Based on current technology, an increase in bandwidth would require fibre optic cables capable of higher bandwidth passing from the local exchanges to subscribers' homes, which would be unprofitable given current pricing models. The question becomes, how much does it cost to pass this fibre? The answer depends on customer density, but according to a Goldman Sachs report, it would cost $140 billion to pass the entire US. This is the equivalent of a median cost of approximately $4,500 per household. However, there are two pieces of information missing in the Goldman report. Firstly, the report assumes a single ISP making the investment, such as Google. This ignores competition. Competitors would invest in parallel, doubling the cost and halving the rewards. Currently, there are strongholds within each state whereby dominant ISPs act in regional oligopolies. Their presence prevents returns on any future competitive investment. The second problem is that not everyone lives in a big city. The fibre needs to be passed across the entire country, and while the distance in New York might be a city block, in Texas it might be tens of miles. Customer density is therefore key. The greater the density of customers, the more ISPs can disperse the costs and rationalise the investment. So ISPs are no longer willing to invest in wired infrastructure, are unable to change the pricing scheme to subscribers, and are facing increased demand and costs. This has led them to the solution of fast lanes, satisfying end consumers' need for Netflix, but at the cost of content providers' competitiveness. Looking at industry profitability, we see that ISPs have maintained a steady margin over time, even as data consumption has increased. Acknowledging that the major ISPs are part of larger conglomerates, we see a similar trend in their ROICs. ISP profitability appears to be healthy. However, an argument could be made that their recent profitability has been enabled by a lack of investment. So how does the internet in the United States compare to the internet abroad? Despite inventing the internet, the United States fares poorly against its European counterparts. Looking at data from netindex.com, which tracks mean broadband subscription cost divided by GDP, the US is ranked 17th within the OECD. While US broadband speeds increased from 2008 to 2014, they increased more slowly than those of other countries. Their ranking is falling over time from number 6 in 2008 to number 19 in 2014. Of the 16 countries that rank higher, all are European, with the exception of Israel. And they are actually considered European by the European Soccer Federation. So we wanted to understand what Europe is doing differently. The EU introduced regulation in the year 2000 requiring incumbents to open access to their last mile. New entrants can now install hardware at the local exchange, which allows them to deliver broadband to customers. Being able to selectively choose local exchanges has reduced the minimum efficient scale required for broadband entry in Europe significantly. This has greatly increased competition amongst ISPs. For example, 85% of UK residents can now choose from more than 2 ISPs for their broadband, while in the US, only 33% enjoy this level of choice. Also, in the US, 30% of homes face no choice at all. The EU has also recently voted in favour of net neutrality. In a recent tweet, the EU Commissioner for Digital Agenda weighed in on what she believes are the implications for startups. Another interesting international example is Australia, which is currently behind the US, but is making significant investments in its broadband infrastructure. In 2013, the Australian government launched a plan to connect 93% of Australian homes with fibre by the year 2021. Australia suffers similar challenges related to its size as the US does, so the Australian government is committed to providing Australian citizens beyond the reach of fibre with fixed wireless antennae or satellite internet connections. And what about the developing world? India is the world's second most populous country and is growing more quickly than China, the world's most populated nation. While only 1% of Indians, or 12 million people, have a fixed-line broadband connection, 120 million Indians were connected to the internet in 2013, and that figure will grow to 330 million by 2015. This growth has been fueled primarily by Indians accessing the internet via mobile devices, and the trend is increasing. 75% of new Indian internet users will connect via mobile. India is leapfrogging fixed-line connection technology, a trend across the developing world. If the forces of government regulation and public investment shaping the internet abroad are waning in the United States, what technologies might change internet in the US? Promising technologies include mobile internet, municipal fibre optic internet networks, and sci-fi sounding solutions like fleets of drones or high-altitude balloons used to create blanket Wi-Fi networks. However, none currently show the signs of being a viable alternative to fixed broadband internet in the United States. Mobile internet technologies are limited by the number of simultaneous connections they can serve, and cable lobbyists have managed to convince a number of states to outlaw municipal fibre networks. While exciting technologies, Google's balloons and Facebook's drones are designed to bring lower bandwidth internet to the developing world rather than high bandwidth internet to the US. In summary, broadband providers in the US currently have the upper hand in their battles with subscribers, content providers, and regulators. With the cost of entry into the fixed-line broadband market too high to attract new entrants, it is unlikely that competition will significantly increase in the near future. There is hope that the concession from the FCC over net neutrality will give the ISPs the returns needed to increase investment in infrastructure, but there is a chance they will just use the additional revenues to boost their own ROICs. Either way, without additional investment or technological innovation in the medium term, broadband in the US is likely to fall behind the demands of an increasingly connected population.